all returned covered with American laurels, and had the cream of American lands allotted us for our services. The British officer after the Battle of Long Island.
Unwisely, Washington had divided his army between Long Island and the island of Manhattan. With the British fleet in control of the harbor, nearly 10,000 of his troops now found themselves trapped on Long Island. The revolution survived when they made their escape thanks to the seafaring skill of John Glover and his Marbleheaders.
Washington got them all down in boats run by a group of his soldiers who were from Marblehead, Massachusetts, who understood water and sea and shipping, and under cover of darkness got his entire army from Brooklyn back across to Manhattan. When the British woke up the next morning, they looked out and the American lines were empty.
That was the loss of the first and greatest opportunity to destroy Washington and his army.
Overpowered on the land and on the water, the Americans tried a secret weapon, David Bushnell's Turtle, the world's first submarine.
It could submerge for a half hour, and Benjamin Franklin gave Bushnell the idea to illuminate the dials down in the darkness under the water with foxfire. So the guy had a compass down there and he had a general idea of where he was going.
With a detachable time bomb at the tip of the submarine, Bushnell's pilot set out to destroy the British fleet. However, the attack was a complete failure, and a second attempt was never made. For 2 weeks, Howe refused to move on the Americans on Manhattan Island. Instead, he conducted peace talks at this home on Staten Island with Continental Congress Representatives Benjamin Franklin and John Adams.
During the peace conference, Franklin and John Adams shared a room, and it turned out that Franklin, who was a great fan of fresh air, wanted the window open, and Adams wanted the window closed, and they debated this for a long time. And Adams said that while Franklin was explaining to him the virtues of fresh air, he fell asleep.
On Staten Island, Adams and Franklin were no better making peace with the British than they were making peace with each other. The talks broke down, and Howe moved again against Washington's army. This time, his troops came ashore at Kip's Bay on Manhattan.
The Connecticut militia saw this armada of ships coming towards them, and as they got out of the boats with their bayonets ready, they just took off. They ran right by Washington at 42nd Street, and he couldn't believe his eyes. And he threw his hat on the ground, and he said, "Are these the men I'm supposed to defend America with?"
Routed at Kip's Bay, Washington's army made their next stand in the naturally defensive terrain of Harlem Heights on northern Manhattan Island. When the British sighted the Americans, they sounded the call used by successful fox hunters. This humiliation may have prompted the Americans into their most successful engagement in New York, a draw.
Such is my situation, that if I were to wish the bitterest curse to an enemy on this side of the grave, I should put him in my stead with my feelings. George Washington.
Howe finally chased Washington north out of New York City and up to the village of White Plains. Here at the end of October, Washington would meet the British again. But the real damage would take place at Forts Washington and Lee, twin encampments on the Hudson designed to keep the British from sailing up the broad, vital river.
While he's up in White Plains, Howe draws almost all his army back to Fort Washington, and he executes this absolute masterpiece of an assault on Fort Washington. They bombarded it from all sides, and they just, in a half hour, they utterly and totally demolished the American defenses And the whole 3,000 men and all these precious cannon, over 100 cannon, surrendered.
4 days later, General Charles Cornwallis, with 4,000 men in flatboats, attacked Fort Lee, high up on the Hudson Palisades. The Americans escaped this time, but the fort and all of its stores fell into British hands.
No man, I believe, ever had a greater choice of difficulties and less means to extricate himself from them. George Washington.
By the end of 1776, New York, its harbor, and the vital Hudson River belonged to the British. With Washington's army shriveled to a few thousand men, American hopes were never fainter. In December, common sense author Thomas Paine wrote another brilliant piece of propaganda entitled The American Crisis.
These are the times for trying men's souls. The summer patriot will, in this crisis, shrink from the service of his country. But he that stands it now deserves the thanks of man and woman. Tyranny, like hell, is not easily conquered. Yet we have this consolation with us, that the harder the conflict, the more glorious the triumph. Thomas Paine.